In today's video, we explore 5 real-life animal attacks that turned safaris into tragedies, from a young tracker fatally charged by a buffalo to a lone traveler in Kenya whose late-night snack became a death sentence. But first we begin in South Luangwa National Park, where 3 people found themselves with a lion with nothing left to lose. It was September 20th, 2017, and Zambia's dry season scorched South Luangwa like a furnace. Dust devils twisted through the mopane woodland as safari trucks rolled past grazing antelope. The heat shimmered, masking any hint of danger, and beneath a nearby thicket, a wounded predator watched with eyes that burned with pain and territorial rage. Samuel Petros, 44, was a respected safari guide born near Mfuwe, just outside South Luangwa National Park, where he had spent over 20 years leading researchers and tourists through its remotest terrain. Known for his ability to interpret tracks, sounds, and animal behavior with near-instinctive precision, Samuel inspired trust among clients and admiration among peers. But behind that calm confidence was a growing tendency to dismiss caution, taking less used routes, shrugging off newer safety protocols. As the sole provider for 3 children and an extended household, Samuel carried more than the weight of a steering wheel. Every trip funded school fees, maize, and medicine. Pride built his reputation, but pressure quietly drove his risk tolerance higher than most could see. That morning's group was a mixed expedition: 2 vehicles, 6 guests, and 1 volunteer assistant. In Samuel's vehicle rode a 55-year-old retired biology teacher from Oregon, fulfilling a lifelong dream to study African ecosystems, her notebook already thick with notes. Also aboard was Caleb Strick, a quiet 27-year-old wildlife volunteer on a gap year before grad school, reassigned to Samuel's truck that morning due to a last-minute seating mix-up. From the rear bench, Caleb focused intently on documenting antelope behavior, his camera always ready. What they didn't fully grasp that day was the lethal nature of the predator lurking nearby. African lions are apex predators capable of taking down prey weighing over 1,000 pounds. A male lion's bite force exceeds 650 pounds per square inch, while their massive paws, equipped with retractable claws up to 1.5 inches long, can deliver bone-crushing blows. Most critically, wounded or displaced lions exhibit unpredictable aggression patterns, their territorial instincts heightened by stress and pain. Around midday, Samuel parked beneath a sparse line of mopane trees, angling the vehicle for a better view of a nearby impala herd. The engine stayed on as the heat bore down. He had pulled in closer than usual for clearer photos, focusing on the antelope and missing the subtle signs under the brush: drag marks, faint paw prints, evidence of a wounded lion passing through. Unseen by the group, a dominant male had recently been forced out of his pride after a violent fight. Injured and displaced, he stayed near water but avoided main trails. This phase, wounded, unpredictable, and hyper-alert, was when lions were most dangerous. As Samuel pointed out antelope features for Laurel's notes, a gust of wind knocked Caleb's field bag off the rear bench. The young volunteer stepped out to grab it. Samuel saw him move and hissed a sharp warning, telling him to stay low and get back in the vehicle immediately. But it was too late. The sudden upright motion near cover triggered the lion's defensive instincts. The lion burst from the brush in a blur of muscle and dust. It covered the ground in seconds, hitting Caleb at the hip and dragging him down before he could react. The animal's momentum pulled him into the brush, out of sight. Samuel moved fast, grabbing the flare gun and ordering everyone to remain completely still. But then the lion came back, no longer hunting, but guarding. The second charge was straight at Samuel. He had just risen when the lion slammed into him, knocking him into the rear tire. The flare gun dropped. Samuel fought to shield his head, but the lion clamped its jaws around his neck. In panic, Laurel Boone stood and waved toward the second vehicle down the trail. The lion turned instantly. It jumped into the truck's open side, tackling her between the benches. She tried to back away, but there was nowhere to go. Her screams were brief. Blood hit the canvas roof and windshield in long streaks. The remaining 3 tourists, 2 British researchers and a local NGO worker, threw themselves under seats and behind doors, their terror-stricken faces pressed against the vehicle's floor. One managed to radio the second vehicle through trembling fingers, his voice barely coherent as he described the carnage unfolding around them. The second crew arrived within minutes, horn blaring and engine revving in an attempt to drive the lion away. The massive predator stalked in a wide arc around both vehicles, its mane matted with blood, before finally slinking back into the Mopane woodland. All 3 victims were beyond help by the time the rescue team reached them. Samuel's chest had been crushed by the lion's initial impact. Caleb's body lay partially hidden in the bush, his neck broken by the predator's powerful jaws. Laurel had bled out almost instantly from catastrophic injuries to her throat and upper torso. The authority officers who investigated the scene later confirmed that the lion was known to local trackers. It had been involved in a recent territorial clash with a younger male and showed clear signs of stress-related aggression. The attack was classified as reactive and territorial rather than predatory. The lion had been defending what it perceived as its recovery space, rather than hunting for food. In the aftermath, South Luangwa National Park implemented new safety protocols requiring greater distances from shaded thickets during high heat hours when stressed animals seek shelter. Volunteer positions were no longer rotated without direct guide approval and additional safety briefings. Caleb's parents requested that his field journals be donated to a conservation nonprofit, ensuring his passion for wildlife would continue to educate others. Laurel's family established a small education fund for African biology students, honoring her lifelong dedication to understanding the natural world. As for Samuel, his body was returned to Mfue and buried in a quiet ceremony attended by fellow guides and family. For all his knowledge and instincts, the bush he loved offered no exceptions, not even for those who knew it best. Even as South Luangwa's wounded lion proved experience meant nothing to rage and instinct, miles away in Kenya, a travel writer's quiet defiance would draw out a predator built to feed on human flesh with bone-crushing precision. It was August 21st, 2015, near the end of Kenya's dry season, and the Masai Mara was alive with unseen movement and sound. Predators hunted under a moonless sky while most tourists stayed behind the safety of fenced lodges. But at a small, unfenced budget camp near the Talek River, Neil Bracken zipped up his canvas tent, confident that years of travel had made him immune to Africa's real risks. Neil Bracken was a 38-year-old freelance travel writer from Minneapolis, his blog chronicling edge of the map experiences that made readers feel embedded in raw, unfiltered nature. He specialized in authentic narratives, sleeping under canvas, cooking over fire, writing by torchlight. He rarely spoke about it online, but he had lost his younger brother in a car accident years earlier and often said that danger made him feel closer to the living. He distrusted the luxury safari circuit, calling it pampered voyeurism, and instead sought barefoot authenticity, even when it courted death. However, Neil likely underestimated the lethal precision with which scavengers dominated the night. Spotted hyenas possess one of the strongest bite forces in the animal kingdom, 1,100 pounds per square inch, capable of crushing elephant bones. These 140-pound predators hunt in coordinated packs, their massive jaws designed to tear through hide and bone with surgical precision. Most critically, hyenas show no fear of humans when food scent overrides their natural caution. Neil's confidence bordered on fatal arrogance. He'd backpacked through Patagonia and slept rough in the Yukon, believing Kenya was no different. The local camp staff had warned every guest, never keep food in tents, secure all scented items in lock boxes, zip tents completely closed each night. But Neil, preparing for a long day of hiking and writing, had stashed protein bars and trail mix inside his canvas duffel bag. He left the mesh door flap partially open, letting in the breeze for what he called a real experience. That small act of defiance would prove fatal. Around 3:40 a.m., 3 spotted hyenas crept into the unfenced camp's perimeter. A motion-triggered trail camera, set up by a neighboring wildlife researcher to study nocturnal activity, captured the moment their eyes glinted near the tents, moving low and fast between the shadows. Drawn by the scent of Neil's snacks, they approached his tent with the silent coordination of apex scavengers, shoulder-high predators guided by smell rather than sight. The lead hyena pawed at the nylon corner before its powerful jaws bit through the mesh. The zipper gave way with a soft, deadly rip. Inside, Neil stirred as the first hyena pushed its massive snout into the tent. He sat up, flashlight trembling in his hand, and kicked at the shape in the darkness. That sudden motion, recorded as muffled thuds on an adjacent guest's GoPro, left running overnight for a time-lapse video, only triggered their predatory instincts. The lead hyena lunged forward, its bone-crushing jaws clamping onto Neil's forearm with enough force to shatter bone instantly. The others followed in a coordinated attack. In seconds, the tent collapsed in a flurry of snarls and tearing fabric. Neil screamed, flailing desperately against the biting and tearing, but spotted hyenas are designed to overpower prey much larger than humans. Their coordinated pack hunting, perfected over millennia, made resistance futile. Several campers reported hearing a series of screams abruptly cut off, followed by animal sounds that didn't belong so close to humans. The hyenas struck his legs and neck with surgical precision, dragging him partially outside the collapsed tent as his cries faded to wet gasps. In the adjacent campsite, a Czech backpacker awoke to the commotion and called out in alarm, but by then, the terrible sounds had faded to heavy panting and the rustle of bloodied nylon in the grass. The attack had lasted less than 3 minutes. Brutal, efficient, and final. Rangers stationed a mile away arrived at sunrise, alerted by camp staff who discovered the tent torn and blood-slicked in the morning light. Neil's body lay partially ejected from the collapsed canvas, his legs mauled beyond recognition and his face destroyed by powerful jaws. His left forearm was completely missing, torn away by hyena teeth designed to strip meat from bone. Rangers identified at least 3 separate bite patterns, consistent with a typical hyena scavenging group's coordinated feeding behavior. Investigators found no signs of a prior kill in the area. The hyenas had come specifically for Neil's food and found human flesh instead. His duffel bag had been shredded, protein bar wrappers scattered like confetti in the dirt around his remains. In the aftermath, the camp instituted mandatory food inspections and reinforced sleeping areas with steel mesh linings. A local ranger remarked that even harmless scavengers become lethal when food scent overrides their natural fear of humans. Neil's partial remains were cremated in Nairobi, with his ashes flown back to Minnesota, where a small memorial was held by family who had begged him to travel more cautiously. In the end, his pursuit of authenticity gave wild animals one more reason to see tents as prey. Yet even as Neil's shredded tent marked the price of underestimating scavengers deep in Zimbabwe, an archivist was about to misread a predator that kills not by chance, but by design. It was July 2, 2016, deep into Zimbabwe's dry season, and Hyena National Park baked under the midday sun. Temperatures topped 100 degrees as dust clung to the still air. A private safari vehicle sat parked under a sausage tree near a dry riverbed, its passengers resting. The world appeared peaceful, but death was watching from the shadows. Paulina Marsh was a 41-year-old museum archivist from Eugene, Oregon, on the final leg of a 2-week anniversary trip with her husband, Alan. According to friends, she possessed a historian's mind and an adventurer's heart. The type who lingered in ancient ruins without guides, who strayed from marked paths in botanical gardens, who chose experience over caution. The couple had deliberately opted for a custom safari with just one guide, seeking authentic encounters away from tourist crowds. They had postponed this trip twice while caring for Paulina's ailing mother, making this long-awaited journey feel especially meaningful. Unfortunately, Paulina didn't fully comprehend the lethal nature of the predator lurking in the area. African leopards, among the most efficient killers in the animal kingdom, are capable of taking down prey twice their size. These 150-pound cats possess incredible strength, able to drag carcasses weighing 300 pounds up into trees. Their bite force of 400 pounds per square inch, combined with razor-sharp canine teeth, can puncture skulls and crush windpipes instantly. Most critically, leopards are ambush predators, remaining motionless for hours before exploding into action with lightning speed. When their guide parked beneath the acacia to prepare lunch, Paulina quietly stepped out, mentioning to Alan that she needed a quick break. He and the other tourists saw her wander toward a clump of bush about 30 yards from the vehicle, assuming the open landscape meant safety. The guide, preoccupied with unloading gear and trusting guests to stay nearby as instructed, didn't register Paulina's quiet detour until it was too late. Unknown to Paulina, she had entered the peripheral territory of a mature male leopard seeking refuge from the day's heat. The cat had been resting motionless behind a fallen log, its rosette-patterned coat providing perfect camouflage against the dappled light filtering through the canopy. Leopards are masters of concealment, capable of remaining invisible just feet from their prey until the moment they strike. To the leopard, Paulina's crouched position and soft rustling movements resembled the behavior of antelope or other prey animals. Her light-colored clothing against the dark undergrowth created the perfect silhouette to trigger the cat's predatory instincts. Leopards are opportunistic hunters, and a lone human presenting vulnerable body language represented an easy target. Paulina had clipped a GoPro to her chest strap earlier that morning, casually documenting the trip for friends back home, a detail that would later provide harrowing clarity about her final moments. The attack came without warning. No growl, no rustle of leaves, no chance for escape. The leopard burst from its hiding place in a flash of spotted muscle, closing the distance in one fluid leap. Its powerful jaws clamped around Paulina's neck with bone-crushing force, the 4-inch canine teeth puncturing her carotid artery instantly. The GoPro strapped to her chest captured the final jarring seconds as the cat began dragging her backward toward deeper cover, guided by pure instinct. Paulina managed one piercing scream before the leopard's bite severed her vocal cords. Alan, still unwrapping sandwiches at the vehicle, looked up in alarm. By the time he reached the tree line, calling her name frantically, she had vanished into the bush. Their guide arrived moments later, rifle in hand, scanning desperately for signs of movement. They followed the bloody tracks another 60 yards before discovering Paulina's body, partially concealed in the gnarled roots of a tree. Authorities were called by the guide, knowing they'd bring a body bag instead of an ambulance. In the autopsy, her back bore deep claw marks where the leopard had gripped her during the drag, and her neck showed the fatal puncture wounds from the initial killing bite. The attack had been swift and efficient, exactly as nature had designed it. Leopards kill by suffocation or severing the spinal cord, techniques perfected over countless generations of hunting. Wildlife officers who investigated the scene confirmed that leopards in the region had grown increasingly bold during the harsh, dry season. With natural prey scarce and water sources dwindling, the cats were venturing closer to human activity areas. The particular leopard responsible was later identified by tracks as a territorial male that had been displaced by drought conditions, making it more aggressive and unpredictable. Alan returned to Oregon alone, carrying only memories and the devastating knowledge that his wife's final moments had been spent in terror. Paulina's death was officially ruled a predatory attack with no evidence of provocation, simply a case of being in the wrong place when a perfect predator decided to strike. The safari company immediately revised its safety protocols, now explicitly warning guests that no area, however routine or peaceful it appeared, was safe without armed escort clearance. New regulations required constant radio contact and prohibited any guest from leaving the vehicle unaccompanied, even for basic needs. As Paulina's blood vanished into Zimbabwe's scorched soil, 2 years later, in South Africa's sunlit grasslands, a father would learn how one cracked car door could open the way for apex instinct to tear through the illusion of safety. It was March 13th, 2018, the dying breath of Kruger's rainy season, when golden grass grew tall enough to conceal predators. The air was heavy and still, as a rented white Toyota Hilux idled at a remote turnout near the Sabi River, its rear doors slightly open. In the suffocating heat, predators waited with infinite patience. Mike Delano was a 46-year-old contractor from Colorado who had planned this trip as an escape from his high-stress job. Proud to do things the real way, he'd skipped guided tours in favor of a self-drive safari, convinced his experience made him invulnerable. His wife Grace had coordinated the travel details while their children, 14-year-old Aaron and 16-year-old Zach, spent the drive absorbed in their phones, documenting their African adventure for friends back home. Mike had insisted that roadside lunch stops were part of the authentic experience, believing danger only struck those who broke park rules. He'd skimmed the safety warnings, dismissing clauses about unsecured doors and big cat behavior during midday heat. In his mind, staying inside the vehicle guaranteed safety. He was so oblivious of the lethal efficiency of the predators stalking his family. African lionesses are perfectly evolved killing machines, weighing up to 280 pounds with bite forces exceeding 650 pounds per square inch. Their retractable claws, over 2 inches long, can disembowel prey with a single swipe. Most critically, lions are ambush predators capable of explosive bursts of speed, covering 50 feet in under 3 seconds when attacking from concealment. Near the brush line, less than 20 feet from their truck, 2 lionesses had been watching for nearly 10 minutes. Flattened against the earth, their tawny coats perfectly camouflaged against the golden grass, they remained virtually invisible while studying this potential prey. Lions are patient hunters, capable of remaining motionless for hours before striking with devastating precision. The mistake was seemingly insignificant, but absolutely fatal. To combat the stifling heat, the family had left their rear doors slightly ajar while unpacking lunch. Aaron shifted restlessly in the back seat, reaching for snacks and peering out windows at the deceptively peaceful landscape. When she leaned over to grab a bag of chips from the floor, her weight pushed the left door open wider with a soft, metallic click. That tiny sound triggered millions of years of predatory instinct. In an explosive blur of muscle and fury, the larger lioness launched from the grass and was inside the cabin before human reflexes could respond. The force of her 250-pound frame knocked Aaron backward into the seat as massive jaws clamped down on her neck and collarbone with bone-crushing force. Her scream was cut short as the lioness's 4-inch canine teeth severed her carotid artery instantly. Mike spun around, desperately grabbing his daughter's arm and pulling with all his strength. But human muscle was no match for a predator designed to drag down 1,000-pound buffalo. As he tried to shield Aaron, the lioness swiped at him with claws that tore through flesh like razors before sinking her teeth into his throat. His struggles weakened rapidly as blood poured from the massive wound. Grace shrieked in terror, throwing her full weight against the door to wedge it partially closed. Blood pooled in the footwell of the confined space. Zach, paralyzed by shock, pulled himself into the front seat and frantically locked both doors while Grace fumbled for the radio, her screams for help echoing across the empty savannah. The lioness retreated after several minutes of feeding, leaving both victims motionless in pools of their own blood. Aaron had died instantly from cervical trauma, her young life snuffed out in seconds. Mike bled out within minutes from his torn carotid artery, his final moments spent watching his daughter die. When park rangers arrived 30 minutes later, they found the vehicle still idling, windows fogged with condensation and blood. Zach sat catatonic in the driver's seat while Grace slumped forward in the passenger seat, whispering her daughter's name in endless repetition. Wildlife officials later tracked the responsible lioness, but chose not to euthanize her, determining it was a situational attack triggered by perceived vulnerability and easy access rather than aberrant behavior. The lioness had simply acted according to her nature when presented with an opportunity. Kruger's park administration used the Delano tragedy to reinforce warnings about door security and predator proximity. New regulations mandated that all vehicle openings remain sealed during stops, with hefty fines for violations. The family's rental company installed automatic door locks on all safari vehicles. At a small service in Cape Town, the Delano's remains were cremated together and returned to Michigan in a single urn. The lesson that even brief carelessness in predator country can end a life is one that regulations alone may never fully prevent. The Delano family's bloodied SUV marked the cost of a single unlocked door. 1 year later in Botswana's tall grass, a conservation guide would learn that misreading tracks by mere hours could summon 1,900 pounds of horned rage. It was November 5, 2019, in Botswana's Okavango Delta. By 7:45 a.m., the sun was already beating down hard as a walking safari group, 2 guides and 4 foreign tourists, left their camp on foot. The low grass was dry and brittle, the air heavy with dust and moisture from the marsh. The bush around them was quiet, offering no warning of what was coming. Leading the group was Rafe Watson, a 29-year-old junior guide newly licensed to conduct treks under senior supervision. He had moved to Botswana from Johannesburg after years volunteering in conservation, determined to make wildlife his life's work. Bookish and methodical, Rafe possessed a gift for reading spoor and leading with quiet confidence. Though he didn't seek the spotlight, he had earned respect for his thoroughness and genuine passion for the wilderness. This was Rafe's 3rd trek as lead guide, with veteran Paul Nkomo following behind. The route was routine, an hour-long loop past antelope, birds, and tracks near a seasonal channel. The tourists, cameras in hand, and naive confidence, chatted quietly as they followed Rafe deeper into the delta's winding grassland. None of them realized they had already walked past the last safe place to turn back. About halfway through their trek, Rafe paused at a muddied patch of trail and crouched low, his trained eyes scanning the ground. Cape buffalo prints, many of them. He ran his experienced hand across the deep impressions, noting how the flattened grass nearby suggested recent movement. The prints appeared older, their edges dried and cracked, leading him to make a fateful judgment. The herd had passed through safely. They could proceed. But they had no real sense of how quickly these animals in the floodplains could turn a quiet morning into chaos. Cape buffalo are among Africa's most dangerous animals, weighing up to 1,900 pounds with horns that can span 4 feet across. These massive herbivores kill more hunters and guides than lions and leopards combined, earning their reputation as one of Africa's Big 5 most dangerous game. Their curved horns can gore with devastating force, while their 1,500-pound bodies can trample victims into pulp. Most critically, wounded or isolated buffalo become unpredictably aggressive, attacking without warning or provocation. Rafe missed 2 critical signs that would cost him his life. The dung nearby was still moist, less than 3 hours old, indicating buffalo were close. Just ahead, the grass grew high and thick, ideal cover for a resting bull. Protocol called for warning claps and a raised voice in dense areas, but Rafe was focused on teaching guests about tracks and bird calls. It wasn't recklessness, just a small misjudgment that didn't feel fatal until it was. Then the morning exploded into chaos. From roughly 25 feet ahead, a wall of dark muscle and fury erupted from the tall grass. A massive lone bull Cape buffalo, separated from the main herd and resting in the shade, charged with the unstoppable force of a freight train. His curved horns, each as thick as a man's arm, were lowered for maximum impact. The tourists screamed in terror as this enraged herbivore thundered toward them. Paul shouted frantically from the rear for everyone to fall back, but Rafe had already made his choice. Without hesitation, he stepped forward into the path of certain death, waving his arms and shouting to draw the buffalo's attention away from his charges. It was an act of pure heroism that would cost him everything. The buffalo struck Rafe with devastating force, its massive horn piercing his chest and lifting his body completely off the ground. The impact drove the horn deep into his lung cavity, puncturing vital organs as blood erupted from the wound. Rafe landed hard in the dust, instinctively curling into a protective ball. The tourists could only watch as they ran away. But the enraged bull wasn't finished yet. The buffalo circled back with terrifying speed, its hooves stomping down on Rafe's prone form twice before Paul fired an emergency flare. The sharp crack and billowing smoke startled the massive herbivore, sending it crashing back into the reeds as suddenly as it had appeared. Paul reached Rafe within moments, finding him alive but gasping desperately for air. Blood spread beneath his back as his punctured lung filled with fluid. The horn had likely severed a major artery, and his face was already turning pale from massive internal bleeding. They radioed frantically for medical evacuation, while Paul applied pressure to the gaping chest wound, but the nearest hospital was over an hour away by helicopter. Rafe's breathing became increasingly labored as his body went into shock from blood loss. Despite Paul's desperate first aid efforts, Rafe slipped away before help could arrive. Park authorities who investigated the scene later determined that the buffalo was likely injured or elderly, which explained its isolation from the herd and heightened aggression. Rafe had correctly identified the tracks and assessed the general situation, but had fatally underestimated how recent the buffalo presence was. They found it a week later and euthanized it. Rafe's body was flown back to Maun, where fellow guides and camp staff held a quiet ceremony honoring his sacrifice. He was remembered as deeply committed to both wildlife conservation and tourist safety, a young man who had died protecting others from his own mistake. Thanks for watching. If these stories gripped you, get ready. The next video is just as intense, and maybe even harder to believe. See you soon.